Don't you worry, the clip's about to begin, but don't forget to subscribe. Or else, don't make me turn this website around.
We have
Hello?
Sam in. Hello. Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Doing okay.
So what'd you want to chat with us about?
about-
I'm Sam in. Sorry, I'm Sam in Massachusetts. I decided to call in. I've been thinking about calling in for a while, but whenever there's a specific subject matter, it's never the right subject matter. And then I heard the first caller talking about free will, and that's what I've been wanting to call in about too. So I figured I'd go ahead and call today.
Sounds good. What's your take?
Yeah.
In college, I was a philosophy major specializing in physics and math. So based on that and studying quantum mechanics and chaos and other things like that, I developed a view which I've heard other people espouse before. I developed it myself, but I'm not the only one who's developed it, of free will that I think exists, and also I think is a definition of free will that should be adopted. I've heard you guys say before that it's all well and good to have a definition of something that exists, but if it's a definition that there's no reason why you should use it, then it's really kind of useless. And I think I have an argument for both. I don't know if I can convince you of either or both during the length of a call, but I'd like to give it a shot.
So you're going with a definition. You're going to tell us your definition of free will. Is that what we're going with?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you my definition of free will, and hopefully, depending on time, also why I think you should use that definition of free will.
Okay.
Basically, in quantum mechanics, I don't know to what degree you'll accept certain things as given and to what degree you need to be convinced. I can convince you, but it would take a lot longer. But in quantum mechanics, it's been pretty conclusively proven that determinism is not true. There was a number of proofs starting with Bell's inequalities and then upgraded versions, the strongest one being from Conway and Cochin, which is rather poorly named the free will theorem, but I won't get into why. They actually didn't understand free will when they named it, so it's poorly named, but it does prove that.
So I don't know if Zod would agree, but I would be happily concede that at the quantum level, I don't actually believe it, but for the sake of this conversation, I'm happy to go with that. At the quantum level, there is genuine randomness. Is that kind of where you're going?
Yes.
The
second part is in chaos theory, anything that's the definition of chaos is anything that's sufficiently dependent on initial conditions will over time lead to macroscopic randomness. If it's random at the initial conditions level, there will be macroscopic randomness at the larger scale. So things like the energy and time uncertainty that says that there's uncertainty in the energy in the electrons in a neuron and the precise time in which that energy decays and sends a pulse along the neuron, that will lead inevitably with a chaotic system, which the brain definitely is a chaotic system, to true randomness in your future brain states.
Okay.
So far?
Yes, I'm with you so far, and I actually don't disagree so far, but it's going to depend on what your definition of free will is, whether I think that matters. So can we move on to the definition?
Right. So when I think of what the will is, I think of it as the decision-making process. And when I think of what free is, I think of it as something that is not predetermined. So if the decision-making process in your brain is not predetermined, that is a definition, and I haven't yet even begun to argue about why you should use this definition, but that is a definition of free will that does actually exist. Are you with me on that?
Can you state it again in one sentence?
Sure. If freedom is a lack of predetermination, and will is the process in your brain by which you make a decision, then you have free will.
Okay.
Literally, your will is free. It's not radical freedom. You can't do whatever you want, but within the range of possible outcomes in your brain, if you go back sufficiently far, it has not been predetermined which of those outcomes you will eventually settle into.
I guess it gets around the deterministic aspect in that what you're essentially saying is because of whatever quantum and chaotic theory, which I don't know the science behind that, and I don't think we really need to delve into that too far, but basically you've presented premises whereby we could see the action of a brain as not being deterministic, right? And so the deterministic objection to free will is bypassed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sure. And I don't. And
yeah, that's fair. And I could see I could see sheer determination not being a problem.
Free will either, but
I'm sorry.
Because actually, go ahead, Sam.
Well, most philosophers argue against the notion that something that's random could count as free will. In this case, I argue that it could. First of all, because it's not truly random; it's influenced by the past. So the reason why I think this definition fits with free will, if you think about the reasons why what people want out of a definition of free will, they want, for example, a sense of responsibility. They want you to be responsible for your decisions. Literally, you are all the processes in your body that lead to this determination. It's not some other random thing that's controlling you. You are that thing. You are nothing but your brain and your body and your neurons and all of those things that are settling to this position. So you are making the decision. And further, you want punishment and reward to have some real meaning. And it does, because the patterns in your brain in one given time strengthen or weaken neural pathways. Rewards and punishment influence the likelihood of future brain states to occur in different ways. So even though there's not determinism about what your future brain state will be, certain brain states become more or less likely depending on the punishments and rewards and other influences over your brain, so it's still sensible to assign blame and praise for your actions.
So I think I'm tracking, and let me just give you a brief reason why I don't actually care that much. If what you say is true or not. So I'm not actually holding very strongly to determinism. And if you heard the call I gave before, when I said that my definition of free will is the ability to have
most chosen. Of it. I've heard you talk about this before, though.
That's right. So if free will is the ability to, if we go with my definition just for a moment, where free will is the ability to have chosen differently, given the precise exact same circumstance. When I say that carefully, because the precise exact same circumstance would include whatever the next quantum randomness, or whatever the most recent bit of quantum randomness was, feeds into the circumstance, whether that's bubbling up to actually affect things or not. Like, whether or not quantum randomness throws determinism off the tracks or not, you're still talking about, is your brain a computer, essentially, that will take the trillions of inputs that it's dealing with and always come out with that same answer? And so if you take those trillions of inputs and it's always going to come to that same answer, then in a way you are
going to come to that same answer.
Right?
Because
so are we on the same page?
In the system, the way that the wave function settles into slight differences in the energy time uncertainty in your neurons will lead. Now, it may not. It depends on what time scale you're talking about, and I don't know what the appropriate time scale is.
Like whatever
it's kind of irrelevant.
The smallest amount of time is
microseconds. It could be minutes. But if you go back, or it could be hours. You go back a certain distance, different possible outcomes are present given the state of the universe from that point.
Go ahead.
If I could step in, I think maybe one disconnect we're having is we're talking about the question of whether something could have different outcomes because it's not deterministic, versus whether whatever your consciousness is could choose one way or the other. It sounds like, Paul, you were maybe saying that our decisions, if quantum theory allows for a certain amount of randomness, if things could have gone one way or the other, given the exact same set of circumstances, our decisions would still come from that output. And it doesn't mean that that was one output that was always going to happen. Maybe it would have been one or two, but either of those is thrust upon us, whichever one comes out of the same set of circumstances. So we're being steered, instead of us being steered down one direction and that kind of taking over our free will, we're being steered in 2, 3, 4, 5 directions, but we're still going to be steered. Is that maybe what you're saying?
So
that is what I'm saying.
You're making with what I'm talking about is what you're referring to as we. We are these processes in our brains. I mean, what do you think your consciousness is?
Well, so free will and agency are very different topics in my view. So you're talking about agency all of a sudden.
What do you think your agency is, or whatever?
Oh yeah, I would agree.
Making the decisions, whatever it is that you're saying needs to have been able to arrive at a different decision. What are you claiming that is?
I think our agency is our collection of our memories, our current brain state, and like basically what's in the emergent consciousness that is in our brain is what we kind of call our agency. And I understand that if there is no free will, that go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, and that's fine. I guess I'm just saying that it's basically the collection of our thoughts, our memories, and our current brain chemistry, which determines our epistemology, right? So basically how we're going to react to things combined with our past, combined with all our current conditions around us at any given instant. That's, to me, is our agency. Do you have a problem with that?
So I agree with that 100%. And so now let's look at how this interacts with what I was saying. Your past, your current brain state, and all that includes all your memories and everything else, is the system as it exists right now. That system includes superpositions of various superpositions within the electrons in your neurons that bear an energy time uncertainty. There are a certain range of possible future brain states you could have based on the current uncertainty and based on your existing brain state. That uncertainty, when it settles through quantum fluctuations, will lead to any one of those possible outcomes. But all of that is occurring within that system that you are saying is your agency.
Right. So I think where you and I might differ is you are saying that the uncertainty is part of me, where I am saying the uncertainty is an external factor. Is that a fair way we're differing? Is that a fair way of describing how we're differing?
I suppose so. If you're claiming that the uncertainty is an external factor, then that is a fair way of saying it. But how? Why? What would make you say that the uncertainty is an external factor? I don't understand how that.
Because I don't have any
external about it. If it's part of your consciousness in your brain.
What I would say is it's as external as whether a bus is going to hit me or not. It's as external as the temperature of the ozone interaction with how warm it's going to be outside, and that might actually influence my decisions. But it's not up to me. Like, I just don't see how quantum fluctuations can be considered part of my agency when I.
So you're familiar with.
I guess where I see this, Sam, if you don't mind me interjecting for a second, I think where I see this at right now is I think we are all three at least pretty close to picturing the same process going on, and I'm at the point where I personally am not that interested in exactly how we describe this, because I think we're all picturing roughly the same thing or talking about roughly the same process. And where we're at right now is arguing over boundaries of where we consider the self to begin, or what we consider a decision versus something that's just thrust upon us. And so,
yeah, where we consider the self to begin, I think, is probably the best way of stating where the difference lies.
Yeah, okay. and so I think this is going to be a very difficult and potentially tedious thing to try to really come to agreement on, because really all we're talking about is how we define things that we essentially see the same way. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm really glad to have gotten the opportunity. I hear a lot of talk on this channel, and I don't disagree with you guys about very much. As you can tell from this call, I agree with you about like 99% of what you guys say. But I hear a lot of talk that makes it sound like the idea of free will is essentially settled science. And I really appreciate your giving me an opportunity to voice where there's some disagreement in that. I also want to point people to, there was a recent series in PBS Space Time that dealt with the philosophy of time, which has a lot of very similar ideas and is a good primer on some of the things that lead into this kind of stuff, which I highly recommend for anybody who wants to hear more in-depth stuff about the physics that underlies a lot of this.
Cool. Well, thank you, Sam. I have. I'm going to chew on this later in my own brain. So thank you for the call. That you brought up some interesting points.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Have a good day.
Now, I think the important question is, are you going to decide to chew on that in your brain, or will it be an inevitable?
I have no choice. I will have no. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, this is again why I guess I have trouble really getting too interested in free will, because I think, and maybe it's just the boundary of my knowledge and my comprehension, and I'm running up against my own ability to get my head around this, but it feels like generally you just start talking about definitions pretty quickly when you're on this topic.
Right. And Sam wasn't actually in any way putting forth anything beyond natural to explain anything. So ultimately, in terms of where you and I often sit in terms of the apologetics, counter-apologetics, and is there a supernatural or not, the slight difference that I might have with Sam we would both agree that it's all material, ultimately. Yeah. So in terms of the broader theistic implications, he and I would be on the same page. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sue a he.
Oh, you're good. And it's not. I'm sorry, what's that?
I just don't remember if Sam was a he, so I didn't mean to misgender if I did.
Yeah, I believe it was. And it's not to say that I immediately find questions like Sam poses to be irrelevant or tedious. I think I actually like different ways to get my head around the problem. I think there's just a limit to really where you're going to get. But yeah,
I agree.
It's interesting to think about.
Hey, thanks for checking out this clip for The Line. While you're here, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then share this with that bitter uncle of yours who loves talking about the good old days.